My name is Sophie, 32 years old, and I'm standing in the marble foyer of a 15,000 square foot mansion in Atherton, California, watching my entire future crumble with just one sentence. The crystal chandelier above cast shadows across Daniel's face as he spoke those words that would change everything. My mother doesn't want you here. 3 years together, an engagement ring on my finger, and this is how it ends. Before I share what happened that night and the shocking aftermath that nobody saw coming, I'd love to know where you're all watching from. Please hit that subscribe button if you want to hear how a software engineer from a working-class family brought down an empire. And trust me, you'll want to stick around for what happens next. 3 years ago, I met Daniel Whitmore at a tech conference in San Francisco. I was presenting a paper on distributed systems architecture, and he was there scouting for talent for his fintech startup. He approached me during the networking session, coffee in hand, that confident smile that would later become so familiar. I'm Daniel, CEO of Quantum Financial Technologies, and I think you might be exactly who we need to revolutionize our platform. I was a senior software engineer at a Fortune 500 company, then comfortable but hungry for something more challenging. Daniel was 35, brilliant, charming, in that effortless way that made everyone in the room gravitate toward him. We talked for 3 hours that first day, starting with API structures and ending with our favorite hiking trails in Big Sur. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room, even when we were surrounded by hundreds of conference attendees. Our first real date was a week later. He took me to this tiny Ethiopian restaurant in the Mission District that you'd never find unless you knew exactly where to look. We sat on low stools eating injera with our hands laughing about our worst coding disasters. He told me about the time he accidentally deleted an entire production database on his second day at Google. I shared my story about pushing code that sent 3,000 emails to the CEO in 5 minutes. We were both ambitious, both driven, both children of the tech boom, who believed we could build something that mattered. 6 months in, I was practically living at his downtown penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Bay Bridge, minimalist furniture that probably cost more than my annual salary, and a kitchen that had never seen actual cooking until I arrived. I'd make us dinner while he worked on pitch decks, and we'd eat standing at the counter, laptops open beside our plates, discussing user acquisition strategies between bites of pasta. The thing about Daniel was that he made me feel like an equal partner from day one. When his startup hit a technical wall with their payment processing system, he didn't just ask for advice, he offered me equity to come solve it. I spent 3 months of nights and weekends rebuilding their entire architecture. The platform I created could handle 10,000 transactions per second, with 99.99% uptime. Within 6 months, Quantum went from 5 employees in a co-working space to 50 people in a proper office in South Park. But there were signs I should have paid attention to. Daniel rarely talked about his family. I knew his father had passed away when he was 15, leaving behind a technology empire that his mother Margaret had somehow transformed into a real estate dynasty worth $500 million. When I asked about meeting her, he'd always say she was traveling for business. Tokyo one week, Dubai the next, always somewhere that required her immediate attention. There were no family photos in his penthouse, no childhood memories shared over wine. His sister Lily existed only as a name in passing conversation. The first year I thought he was just private. The second year I started to wonder. By the time he proposed at Bixby Bridge in Big Sur, 2.5 years into our relationship, I'd convinced myself it didn't matter. We were building our own future. The proposal was perfect in that calculated way Daniel approached everything. Sunset the Pacific, crashing against the cliffs below a 3-carat diamond that caught the light like captured stars. He got down on one knee and said, "Sophie Chen, you've debugged my life in ways I never knew I needed. Will you marry me?" I said yes through tears, thinking about how my parents would cry when I told them their daughter was marrying into one of San Francisco's most prominent families. We planned a spring wedding at a vineyard in Napa. I showed him Pinterest boards of wildflower bouquets and farm tables. He smiled and nodded and said, "Whatever makes you happy," but I could see something shifting in his eyes. The calls from his mother started increasing after our engagement announcement. He'd step out onto the balcony to take them, returning 20 minutes later with tension written across his shoulders. The first real warning came 3 weeks after our engagement when Lily showed up at our penthouse unannounced. Daniel was at a board meeting and I was working from home deep in code review when the doorbell rang. She stood there in a cream-colored Chanel suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. Her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect chignon that made her look older than her 28 years. "You must be Sophie," she said, walking past me into the apartment without waiting for an invitation. Her eyes swept over everything, taking inventory. The mismatched mugs on the coffee table, my sneakers by the door. The throw blanket my grandmother had crocheted draped over the designer couch. I could see her cataloging every detail that didn't fit the Whitmore aesthetic. She perched on the edge of the sofa like she was afraid of contamination. "So tell me about your family," she said, though it sounded more like a demand than a request. "What do your parents do?" "My dad's an electrician," I told her, refusing to feel ashamed. "He's worked for the same company for 30 years. My mom was a nurse at Stanford Hospital until she retired last year. They live in a 2-bedroom house in Redwood City that they've owned since 1992. Lily's smile was sharp as winter wind. "How interesting." Daniel always did like his charity projects. I felt the words like a physical blow but kept my expression neutral. "I'm nobody's charity project. I graduated summa cum laude from UC Berkeley. I've been promoted 4 times in 6 years. Your brother's company is successful because of the platform I built." She stood up, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her skirt. "I'm sure you're very accomplished in your field. But there are different kinds of intelligence, aren't there? Knowing which fork to use, which wine to order, how to navigate a room full of people who summer in the Hamptons and winter in Gstaad. These things matter in our world, Sophie. More than you might think." After she left, I sat on the couch for an hour staring at the city below. When Daniel came home, I told him about the visit. His jaw tightened, and he pulled me into his arms. "Lily doesn't speak for me," he said into my hair. "You're brilliant and beautiful, and everything I want." But even as he held me, I could feel the tremor in his hands. The next few weeks brought a cascade of small moments that felt like paper cuts. Daniel started suggesting improvements to my wardrobe. Nothing dramatic, just, "Wouldn't you be more comfortable in something more classic?" He enrolled us in a wine tasting course, saying it would be fun for wedding planning, but I caught him wincing when I confused a Bordeaux with a Burgundy. He hired a personal shopper to help me find the right dress for his company's investor dinner, someone who used words like timeless and appropriate, while steering me away from anything with personality. The preparation for Margaret's mansion opening became a military operation. Daniel bought me a $5,000 Carolina Herrera dress in midnight red Louboutin heels that made my feet scream diamond earrings that felt heavy as anchors. He had his assistant book me appointments for hair, makeup, manicure, all at places where they served champagne and crystal flutes, and nobody spoke above a whisper. The night before the event, he sat me down for what felt like a briefing. "Mom's invited everyone who matters," he said, his fingers drumming against his thigh. "Senator Morrison will be there, and the Hendersons, they own half the commercial real estate in the city. Just be yourself, but maybe don't mention the public school thing unless someone asks directly. And if they ask about your career plans after marriage, maybe say you're considering consulting or something flexible." "I'm planning to keep working," I said. "I love my job." His smile was strained. "Of course. We'll figure it out. Just for tomorrow night, let's keep things simple." I spent that night Googling Margaret Whitmore. The images showed a woman who looked carved from marble, all sharp angles and perfect posture. Tickles in the Chronicle detailed her rise from tech widow to real estate mogul. She'd taken her late husband Richard's fortune and doubled it through strategic acquisitions and ruthless negotiations. There were profiles in Vanity Fair photos from charity galas where she stood beside governors and tech titans. In every image, her smile never reached her eyes. I found the lawsuits, too. 3 former employees claiming wrongful termination. A business partner alleging fraud, though the case was settled out of court. A contractor who said she'd destroyed his company over a 2-week construction delay. The pattern was clear. Margaret Whitmore didn't just win, she annihilated anyone who stood in her way. Daniel found me at 3 in the morning, laptop still open, surrounded by articles. "You're overthinking this," he said, closing the computer. "She's going to love you." How could she not? But we both knew he was lying. The drive to Atherton on Saturday evening was silent except for the GPS directions. Daniel's knuckles were white on the steering wheel of his Tesla, and I could see his jaw working like he was practicing conversations in his head. The dress felt like armor, beautiful but restrictive, and the heels were already cutting into my ankles. I'd spent 3 hours in a salon chair that afternoon, while someone named Anastasia transformed me into someone I didn't recognize. My normally wavy black hair was pinned into an elaborate updo that required 47 bobby pins. My face was contoured and highlighted until my cheekbones could cut glass. The mansion appeared through the trees like something from a movie, all lit windows and perfect landscaping. The driveway curved for a quarter-mile, lined with 100-year-old oaks wrapped in tiny white lights. A fountain imported from Italy dominated the circular drive water, dancing in choreographed patterns. Valets in black uniforms rushed to take keys from Bentleys and Ferraris and Rolls-Royces. We were driving a Tesla, practically middle class in this crowd. 200 guests mingled in the main hall, a space that could have swallowed my parents' entire house 3 times over. The chandelier above us was Austrian crystal, 3 tiers of hand-cut prisms that scattered rainbow light across marble floors. A string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner, their music barely audible over the sound of wealth congratulating itself. Servers in white gloves circulated with champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's car payments. Daniel's hand was tight on my elbow as he guided me through the crowd. He introduced me to faces I recognized from TechCrunch articles and society pages. The mayor's wife complimented my dress while her eyes cataloged everything else about me. A venture capitalist asked about my thoughts on blockchain while clearly not listening to my answer. Everyone was perfectly polite and absolutely dismissive, like I was a temporary accessory Daniel was test driving. Then Margaret appeared. She moved through this crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea, people stepping aside without being asked. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized the sharp architecture of her face. The black Chanel haute couture dress she wore probably cost more than my annual salary, and her diamonds could have funded a startup. She was smaller than I expected, maybe 5'4" in heels, but her presence filled the entire room. Her eyes found mine across the space, and I felt evaluated and dismissed in the span of a heartbeat. She glided over that practiced smile, never wavering. "So you're Sophie," she said, and her voice was like expensive whiskey, smooth with a burn underneath. "I've heard things." Before I could respond, before I could ask what things, before Daniel could even attempt an introduction, she turned away. The dismissal was so complete, so practiced, that I actually stumbled. Daniel caught my arm, and I could feel the sweat on his palm through his suit jacket. The rest of the evening was death by 1,000 tiny cuts. Margaret's circle of friends descended like perfectly dressed vultures. "Where did you go to school, dear? Not Stanford or Harvard or Yale." "Public school." "How refreshing." "Your parents must be so proud," one woman said, managing to make pride sound like pity. Another asked about my pedigree, actually using that word like I was a dog being evaluated for breeding. Lily circulated through the party, introducing me as Daniel's current girlfriend, always emphasizing current like an expiration date. When someone asked about wedding plans, she laughed and said, "Oh, Daniel always testing the waters before diving in." I watched her work the room, saw how she planted seeds of doubt with surgical precision. "Did you know Sophie actually writes code?" Imagine spending all day staring at a computer screen. She must have terrible posture. A woman dripping in emeralds asked which boarding school I'd attended. When I said I went to public school in Redwood City, the silence that followed could have swallowed stars. Someone actually said how diverse while patting my hand like I'd admitted to a terminal illness. Daniel disappeared for longer and longer stretches, pulled into conversations with his mother's friends, leaving me stranded like a dinghy in an ocean of judgment. I found myself standing by the windows, staring out at the manicured gardens, wondering how many of the carefully shaped topiaries cost more than my parents' mortgage. 20 minutes passed before Daniel returned, and when he did, his face had the gray pallor of someone who'd received terrible news. He took my elbow, his grip too tight, and guided me toward a quiet corner near the main staircase. The sounds of the party felt distant, muffled, like we'd stepped into a bubble of impending catastrophe. His mouth opened and closed twice before he found words. "My mother doesn't want you here." The sentence hung between us like a blade. "She says you don't belong in our world. She's threatening to cut me off completely if I don't end this tonight. The trust fund, the board, position, my inheritance, everything. She'll destroy my company, Sophie. She has that power." I stared at him, this man I'd loved for 3 years, this man whose platform I'd built with my own hands, this man who'd knelt on a cliff and promised me forever. The silence stretched between us like taffy, and in that silence, I heard everything he wasn't brave enough to say. "And what do you choose?" I asked, though we both knew the answer. It was written in the sweat on his forehead, the way his eyes couldn't meet mine, the way his hand was already reaching for the ring on my finger. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence was a thunderclap, a door slamming, a future evaporating like morning mist. I pulled the ring off myself, the diamond catching the light one last time before I placed it in his palm. His fingers closed around it reflexively, and I noticed they were shaking. "I understand," I said, and my voice was steady as stone. "I'll leave quietly." "Sophie, wait," he started, but I was already walking away. My heels clicked against the marble like a countdown, click, 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 past the mayor's wife who was deep in conversation about her newest charity. Click, 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 past Lily, who watched with satisfied eyes. Click, 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 past Margaret, who didn't even turn her head. The valet brought my Uber, a Honda Civic that looked like a joke in that sea of luxury. As we pulled away, I didn't look back at the mansion glowing against the night sky. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat in that back seat still wearing my $5,000 dress, and I smiled. Because Margaret Whitmore had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She thought she was dismissing the help. She was actually declaring war on a woman who'd built empires out of code and determination. And unlike Margaret, I didn't need family money to destroy someone. I just needed a laptop and the right motivation. The Uber driver kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, probably wondering why someone in a designer dress was heading to a Marriott in Redwood City instead of home. I'd chosen the hotel deliberately, needing neutral ground to think. The room was corporate bland, everything beige and forgettable, but it was mine for the night. I kicked off the Louboutins that had left my feet bleeding, unzipped the dress that had been meant to make me acceptable, and sat on the bed in the hotel bathrobe, my laptop open before me. My brain shifted into the mode that had earned me 6 figures before I turned 30. Analyze the problem, identify vulnerabilities, execute solution. I wasn't crying over Daniel. I was running diagnostics on 3 years of data I'd ignored. The first email came from Clara, my best friend from Berkeley, who now worked at Morrison Keller and Associates, one of the city's top law firms. I'd asked her to look into some things the week before when Daniel's behavior had started triggering my alarm bells. "Sophie," her email began, "you need to see this. I've attached everything I found. Be careful." The attachments painted a picture that made my stomach turn to ice. Margaret Whitmore had been in negotiations for 6 months with a consortium of Chinese investors led by William Tang. They wanted to acquire quantum financial technologies and merge it with their existing fintech portfolio. The deal was worth $200 million, but there was a catch. William Tang had a daughter, Jessica, recently returned from Harvard Business School. The merger terms included a peculiar clause about strengthening family partnerships between the companies. Clara had found society photos from 3 months ago. Daniel and Jessica Tang at a charity auction, him bidding on art while she touched his arm. Daniel and Jessica at a Warriors game in the owner's box, laughing at something on his phone. Daniel and Jessica at a private dinner at French Laundry that cost $4,000, according to the receipt Clara had somehow obtained. 3 months ago. We were engaged 3 months ago. I was picking wedding flowers while he was dating his future business partner's daughter. The second revelation came when I logged into Quantum's system. Daniel had been sloppy about security, or maybe he just never thought I'd use the admin access he'd given me when I built the platform. I wasn't going to sabotage anything that would be illegal and beneath me, but I could certainly download every piece of code I'd written, every documentation file I'd created, every commit history that showed I was responsible for 70% of the proprietary technology. As the files transferred to my personal cloud storage, I found something else. Patent applications filed 2 weeks ago for the core payment processing algorithm I'd developed. Daniel had filed them under his name alone. No mention of my contributions. No acknowledgement that I'd written every line of code while he was in meetings pretending to understand the technical details. My phone buzzed. Kevin Park, the venture capitalist who'd tried to poach me twice in the last year. Heard through the grapevine about tonight, his text read, "If you're ready to build something of your own, I've got $5 million in seed funding with your name on it." The tech world was small, and gossip traveled at the speed of fiber optic cables. Someone at the party had already started spreading the story. I could imagine how Margaret was spinning it. Daniel had come to his senses, realized the girl wasn't suitable, made the mature choice. By Monday, every tech blog would have a version where I was the gold digger who'd been exposed. I called Kevin back. "Not 5 million, I said. 10. And I want Priya Patel as my co-founder." Priya was the CTO of Daniel's biggest competitor, a woman who'd built 3 successful companies and had a reputation for taking no prisoners. She answered on the first ring when I called, even though it was past midnight. "I've been waiting 2 years for this call," she said. "When do we start Monday?" I told her. "We're going to build something that makes Quantum look like a science fair project." The next call was to James Morrison, an intellectual property lawyer who specialized in Silicon Valley disputes. He listened to my situation, asked precise questions about the documentation I had, and then laughed. "This is going to be fun," he said. "I'll see you at 8 a.m. sharp." I stayed up until dawn sketching out the architecture for a new platform. Not just a copy of what I'd built for Quantum, but something revolutionary. The original platform had been constrained by Daniel's limited vision and his board's conservative approach. This time, I could build it right. Faster processing, better security, seamless integration with blockchain technology, and a user interface so intuitive that even Margaret Whitmore could figure it out. By 6 a.m., I'd incorporated Prometheus Tech, registered the domain, and set up the basic infrastructure. By 7, I drafted a press release that would go out Monday morning announcing the launch of a new fintech startup founded by former Quantum Financial Technologies lead engineer Sophie Chen. I ordered room service breakfast and ate eggs Benedict while reviewing my plan. No drama, no public feuds, no messy emotional outbursts. Just clean, precise execution of a strategy that would dismantle everything Daniel and Margaret held dear. My phone had 47 missed calls from Daniel. I blocked his number, then did the same for Lily and every other Whitmore-adjacent contact. The only message I returned was to my parents letting them know the engagement was off, but I was fine. My mother would want to drive over immediately, but I promised to explain everything at Sunday dinner. The plan was simple. Build a better product, steal his best clients, destroy his company's valuation, watch the Tang family pull out of the merger, see Margaret's perfect plan crumble like ancient parchment, and do it all with a smile on my face and superior documentation. I closed my laptop and finally allowed myself one moment of raw emotion. Not sadness for losing Daniel, I realized now I'd lost him long before tonight, but anger at myself for not seeing it sooner, for thinking love could overcome the centuries-old barriers of class and privilege, for believing that being brilliant and hardworking and loyal would matter more than having the right last name. The anger lasted 30 seconds. Then I transformed it into something more useful. Determination. Margaret Whitmore thought she'd won. She'd removed an unsuitable girl from her son's life and cleared the path for a profitable merger. She'd protected her family's status and secured their financial future. She'd done what queens have done for centuries, arranging marriages like chess pieces on a board of social ambition. But Margaret had made one crucial error. She'd underestimated me. She saw a working-class girl in a borrowed dress playing at belonging. She didn't see the woman who'd graduated top of her class, who'd built systems processing billions of dollars, who'd earned the respect of every engineer in Silicon Valley through talent alone. Sunday morning, I checked out of the hotel and drove to my apartment in Mountain View, the one I'd kept despite practically living at Daniel's penthouse. It was a simple one-bedroom, nothing fancy, but the walls were covered with whiteboards full of code snippets and system diagrams. This was where I did my real thinking away from the chrome and glass of Daniel's world. I spent the day setting up my home office for war. 3 monitors, ergonomic keyboard, the expensive chair I'd bought with my first bonus. I called my landlord and paid 6 months' rent in advance, knowing I'd need stability for what was coming. Then I went shopping not for designer dresses, but for the uniform of a CEO in training blazers from Theory, simple, elegant pieces that said, "Competence, not aspiration." Monday arrived like Christmas morning. At 8 a.m., I walked into James Morrison's office with a box of documentation that would make any lawyer salivate. Employment contracts, email threads, Git commit histories, design documents with my name stamped on every page. He reviewed everything with the expression of a poker player holding 4 aces. Daniel can't claim ownership of any of this, he confirmed. You developed it independently outside of work hours without using company resources. The fact that you gave it to Quantum was essentially a gift. You're free to recreate and improve upon your own ideas. By noon, Kevin Park had wired $10 million to Prometheus Tech's account. Not 5, not the 10 I'd asked for, but 10 with a promise of 40 more if we hit certain milestones. Priya resigned from her position that afternoon, sending a company-wide email that thanked her former employer for the experience, but noted she'd found an opportunity to build something transformative. We leased office space in Palo Alto, nothing fancy, just a floor in a building filled with other startups. But we hired smart engineers who'd been frustrated by Quantum's outdated practices, designers who'd had their best ideas shot down by Daniel's conservative board salespeople, who knew exactly which clients were unhappy with their current payment processing speeds. The first version of our platform went live in beta after just 3 weeks. We'd worked 18-hour days fueled by Thai takeout and righteous anger. The code was clean, elegant, a symphony of algorithms that made Quantum's platform look like a child's piano exercise. We could process 50,000 transactions per second, with latency so low it might as well have been telepathic. TechCrunch picked up the story. On Tuesday of week 4, former Quantum engineer launches, rival platform raises $10 million in seed funding. The article was careful, factual, but the comments section was where the real action happened. Engineers who'd worked with me vouched for my skills. Competitors praised the platform's specifications. And then at comment number 47, someone posted a photo from Margaret's party. Me in that red dress walking out alone with the caption, "Sometimes the best revenge is massive success." Daniel called Priya, trying to convince her to return. She put him on speaker so the whole office could hear him stumble through threats about lawsuits and non-compete clauses that didn't exist. Then he tried bribing, offering her double her salary and a signing bonus that would make a basketball player jealous. She laughed and hung up. By week 6, we had our first major client. Harrison Financial Services, a company that processed payments for 30% of Bay Area small businesses. They'd been with Quantum for 2 years but were frustrated by downtime and Daniel's refusal to implement features they'd been requesting. Our platform gave them everything they wanted and more at 70% of the cost. The dominoes started falling fast after that. Morrison Investments, Patel Group, Chen Industries, which despite the name had no relation to me but loved the optics of the switch. Each client we signed sent Quantum's valuations spiraling downward. The board called emergency meetings. Daniel sent cease and desist letters that James Morrison responded to with the legal equivalent of laughing in his face. Week 8 brought the inevitable. Daniel showed up at our office at 7 p.m. on a Friday, looking like he'd aged 5 years in 2 months. Security called up to ask if they should let him in. I could have said no, but I was curious to see what desperation looked like wearing a Tom Ford suit. He sat across from me in our conference room, the same room where we'd just signed contracts with 3 more quantum clients. The bags under his eyes were designer quality, and his usual perfect haircut had grown shaggy. His hands shook slightly as he placed them on the table. "The platform is failing," he said without preamble. "You built things into it that only you understand. Hidden dependencies, encrypted modules, backdoors I can't find. The engineers I hired to replace you are lost. We've had 3 major outages this week." I leaned back in my chair, keeping my expression neutral. "There are no backdoors, Daniel. No sabotage. The system is failing because you never understood it in the first place. You treated it like magic instead of engineering. Magic stops working when the magician leaves." "My mother is furious," he continued, as if I cared about Margaret's emotional state. "The merger with the Tang family is falling apart. Jessica's father thinks I'm incompetent. They're pulling out of the deal. Mom's lost $40 million in escrow deposits. She blames me for everything." I could have felt sympathy. Could have remembered the man who brought me coffee during late coding sessions, who celebrated with champagne when we signed our first enterprise client. But that man had made his choice in his mother's mansion, had valued his inheritance over integrity. "What do you want from me, Daniel?" "Come back," he said, the words rushing out like water through a broken dam. "I'll make you CTO, real equity this time. Not the joke shares I gave you before. We'll tell everyone it was a strategic decision that you left to gain experience and now you're returning stronger. I'll handle my mother, I promise. We can still make this work, the company us everything." I stood up, smoothing my blazer, the one I'd bought with my own money for my own company. "Daniel," I said, keeping my voice gentle because cruelty wasn't my style, "you made your choice. You chose your mother's money over the woman who loved you. You chose a merger over a marriage. You chose safety over courage. Now you get to live with those choices." "But I love you," he said, and for the first time in 2 months, tears appeared in his eyes. "No," I replied, moving toward the door to show him out. "You loved the idea of me. The brilliant engineer who made you look good, who built your dreams while you took the credit. But when it came time to choose between that love and your mother's approval, we both know what won." Security escorted him out while he was still trying to argue. I watched from my office window as he sat in his Tesla in our parking lot for an hour, probably trying to figure out how to explain another failure to Margaret. Month 3 brought exponential growth. We signed 40 enterprise clients, each one a name that made investors take notice. Our Series A funding round closed at $50 million with Andreessen Horowitz leading the charge. The same firms that had funded Quantum were now betting against it by investing in Prometheus. The tech press couldn't get enough of the story. Female engineer builds better platform, leaves former employer in the dust. The narrative was irresistible, David versus Goliath, with a gender flip and a side of Silicon Valley drama. I turned down most interview requests, letting the product speak for itself, but I did one podcast with Kara Swisher, where I carefully avoided mentioning Daniel by name, while systematically explaining why Quantum's technology was outdated. Margaret tried her own damage control. She had her PR team place stories about Quantum's pivot to new markets, about strategic restructuring that had nothing to do with losing half their clients. But the numbers didn't lie. Their stock price, which had peaked at $80 per share, was now hovering around $30. Then came the unexpected alliance. Lily Whitmore called me on a Tuesday afternoon, her number somehow bypassing my blocked list. "Can we meet?" she asked. Not as Daniel's sister, but as someone who understands what my mother is capable of. We met at a coffee shop in Menlo Park, neutral territory. She looked different out of her armor of designer clothes, wearing jeans and a Stanford sweatshirt, her hair in a ponytail that made her look like the 28-year-old she actually was, instead of the society matron she pretended to be. "I owe you an apology," she started, stirring her latte with unnecessary focus. "What I said about charity projects, the way I acted at the party, all of it. I was playing a role, the one my mother assigned me before I could walk. The dutiful daughter who upholds the family name and destroys anyone who threatens it." Why are you telling me this now? Because you did what I never could, she said, finally meeting my eyes. You walked away. You rebuilt yourself without their money or approval. And you're winning. She told me about Rachel, the woman she'd loved in college, a kindergarten teacher from Oakland, who Margaret had investigated, threatened, and ultimately driven away. Rachel had moved to Portland, changed her phone number, disappeared so completely that even Lily's private investigator couldn't find her. My mother has this gift, Lily said, for making you believe you're nothing without her approval. She raised us in a bubble where everyone who mattered was someone she'd vetted. I'm 28 years old, and I've never had a job, never paid my own rent, never made a decision she didn't approve. Until now. She was moving to New York, she told me, getting an MFA at Columbia. Something Margaret considered a waste of time for someone who should be married to a senator's son by now. She'd already rented an apartment in Brooklyn, nothing fancy, just a studio she'd pay for with money from selling jewelry Margaret had given her over the years. Watch what happens at the Stanford Charity Gala next week, she said as she left. My mother's giving a speech about supporting women in business. The irony would be delicious if it wasn't so toxic. The gala was Margaret's attempt at rehabilitation. 500 guests at $700 a plate, proceeds going to a scholarship fund for female entrepreneurs. I wasn't invited, obviously, but Clara sent me videos from someone live streaming inside. Margaret stood at the podium in a gold Versace gown, talking about the importance of lifting up the next generation of female leaders. She spoke about barriers and glass ceilings, about the need for women to support each other. The audience applauded at all the right moments, but I could see people checking their phones, probably reading the latest article about how Prometheus had just been valued at $1 billion. Then the technical difficulties started. The microphone cut out mid-sentence. The lights flickered. The presentation screen behind her started showing error messages. It wasn't me, I had nothing to do with it, but karma has its own sense of timing. Margaret stood there trying to maintain composure, while the AV team scrambled to fix systems that seemed determined to rebel. Someone in the audience laughed. Then another. Soon the room was buzzing with barely suppressed amusement as one of the city's most powerful women stood helpless before a broken microphone. She left the stage with her chin high, but the damage was done. The Chronicle's Society page the next day ran the headline, "Technical Difficulties Plague Whitmore Gala," with a photo of Margaret looking uncharacteristically flustered. Daniel made one last attempt at reconciliation. He sent a handwritten letter, actual paper and ink, to my office. It was 10 pages of apology, self-recrimination, and promises to change. He said he'd left the company, walked away from his trust fund, was starting over in Seattle. He said losing me had taught him the price of choosing money over meaning. He said he'd wait for me to forgive him, even if it took forever. I kept the letter not out of sentiment, but as a reminder. A reminder that love without courage is just poetry. That promises without action are just pretty words. That choosing safety over someone you claim to love isn't love at all, it's convenience in a tuxedo. My response was the IPO announcement. Prometheus Tech would go public in 6 months, projected valuation $3 billion. I would become at 32 the youngest female CEO to take a company public in Silicon Valley history. The press release went out the same day his letter arrived, and if that was petty, I could live with it. Margaret made her final move through lawyers. A letter suggesting I'd stolen trade secrets, threatening litigation that could drag on for years. James Morrison responded with our own threat, a countersuit for Daniel's theft of my intellectual property, backed by enough documentation to bury them in discovery for decades. They backed down within a week. The last I heard, Quantum was being sold for parts. The Tang family had pulled out completely, taking their $200 million elsewhere. The remaining investors were salvaging what they could, selling the client list and office furniture to competitors. Daniel's 5-year journey from startup founder to tech sector footnote was complete. Margaret's real estate empire survived, of course. People like her always had backup plans for their backup plans. But her reputation in tech circles was radioactive. The woman who'd destroyed her son's company by driving away the engineer who'd built it. The mother whose interference cost investors millions. The society matron who'd been brought down by a girl from Redwood City. with a public school education and a gift for writing code. 1 year later, I stood on the balcony of the New York Stock Exchange, watching the opening bell ceremony for Prometheus Tech's IPO. We'd opened at $45 per share and climbed to $60 within the first hour. My parents were there, my father in a new suit we'd bought together, my mother wearing the pearl necklace I'd given her for her birthday. They didn't entirely understand what I'd built, but they knew their daughter had done something extraordinary. The team was there too, Priya ringing the bell beside me. Kevin Park grinning as his investment multiplied before his eyes. The original engineers who'd believed in the vision when we were working out of a cramped office with secondhand furniture. Even Clara had flown in from San Francisco, taking a day off from her law firm to witness the moment. The financial press was calling it the IPO of the year. A company that had gone from 0 to $3 billion in 12 months, built on superior technology, and the kind of origin story that Silicon Valley pretended to love. The female engineer who'd been dismissed by old money and responded by building new money on her own terms. I gave interviews that day, carefully edited conversations where I talked about innovation and disruption without mentioning the personal history behind it. But everyone knew the real story. It had become legend in tech circles, whispered at conferences and coding boot camps. The woman who debugged her life by removing the faulty code and rebuilding from scratch. That evening at the celebration dinner at 11 Madison Park, Lily sent a text. She was in her second semester at Columbia, living in that Brooklyn studio, dating a poet she'd met at a bookstore. "Congratulations," her message read. "You didn't just win, you transcended. My mother's reading about your IPO in the Times right now. I've never seen her speechless before. Thank you for showing me it was possible to leave." A month after the IPO, I was grocery shopping at Whole Foods in Palo Alto when I ran into Daniel. He was in the produce section, examining avocados with the concentration of someone avoiding eye contact. He looked older, grayer, wearing a hoodie from a company I didn't recognize. We stood there for a moment. Two people who'd once planned a life together, now strangers in the organic fruit aisle. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally managed, "You look well." "I am well," I replied, meaning it completely. "I work for a nonprofit now," he offered. "Teaching kids from underprivileged backgrounds to code. No equity, barely any salary, but it feels like something real." "That's good, Daniel. I hope you find what you're looking for." "I already found it," he said quietly. "I just wasn't brave enough to keep it." I left him there with his avocados and his regrets, walking out into the California sunshine with my groceries and my freedom. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, the Stanford AI professor I'd been dating for 3 months. A man who'd never once asked about my net worth, who got excited about algorithmic efficiency the way other people got excited about sports, who'd proposed our first date by debugging a piece of code I'd posted on GitHub. Dinner at 8, his message read, "I found this hole in the wall, Ethiopian place you're going to love." I smiled, remembering another Ethiopian restaurant, another life, another version of myself who'd believed she needed someone else's family approval to be worthy. That Sophie had built someone else's dream and asked permission to exist in spaces that should have welcomed her brilliance. This Sophie, the real one, had learned that when someone tells you that you don't belong, the answer isn't to try harder to fit in. It's to build your own table, make it bigger and better than theirs, and fill it with people who recognize your worth from day one. Margaret Whitmore had given me an unexpected gift that night in her mansion. She'd freed me from the exhausting performance of trying to belong in a world that would never accept me. She'd forced me to stop making myself smaller to fit through doors held open grudgingly. She'd pushed me to stop asking permission and start taking what I'd earned through talent and determination. The company was worth billions now, but that wasn't the real victory. The real victory was in the scholarship fund I'd established for first-generation college students studying computer science. It was in the 60% of my employees who came from non-traditional backgrounds. It was in the little girls who sent me emails saying they wanted to be engineers because they'd seen someone who looked like them ring the opening bell at the NYSE. Success is the best revenge, people said, but they were wrong. Success isn't revenge at all. Success is freedom. Freedom from the opinions of people who never wanted you to succeed in the first place. Freedom from the need for external validation. Freedom to define your own worth in your own terms. Margaret was probably in her mansion right now, surrounded by the right kind of people, secure in her belief that she'd protected her family from contamination by someone unsuitable. She could keep her marble floors and her charity galas and her son who'd chosen inheritance over integrity. I had something better. I had a life I'd built with my own hands, a fortune I'd earned with my own mind, and a future that belonged to no one but me. And at night, when I closed my eyes, I didn't see the chandelier in her foyer, or the dismissal in her eyes. I saw code, clean and elegant, building something from nothing, creating value where none existed before. Sometimes the universe gives you exactly what you need, disguised as the thing you wanted least. Margaret Whitmore's rejection had been the catalyst for my transformation from someone begging for acceptance to someone who commanded respect. Daniel's betrayal had been the push I needed to stop building other people's dreams and start constructing my own empire. Would I change it if I could? Would I go back and convince Daniel to stand up to his mother, fight for our relationship, choose love over money? The question used to keep me awake, but now I knew the answer. No. Because that Sophie, the one who needed Daniel's validation and Margaret's approval, she was living a half-life. This Sophie, the one who walked away from that mansion with her dignity intact and built something extraordinary from the ashes of humiliation, this was who I was meant to be all along. The best response to "you don't belong here" isn't to prove them wrong. It's to make here irrelevant. Build your own here. Make it so magnificent that their here looks like a shabby consolation prize. Invite everyone who was ever told they weren't enough, and watch the old guard realize that while they were protecting their small kingdom, you were building an empire. That's the thing about people like Margaret Whitmore. They think power comes from keeping others out. But real power comes from opening doors, from building bridges, from creating opportunities where none existed. Real power comes from taking a moment of rejection and transforming it into a lifetime of purpose. So thank you, Margaret. Thank you for showing me I was playing the wrong game. Thank you for forcing me to stop asking permission. Thank you for the push I needed to stop trying to join your table and instead build my own banquet hall. Your son chose you over me, and that was the best thing that ever happened to both of us. He got to remain in the safe small world where his mother's approval mattered more than his own integrity. And I got to discover that I didn't need anyone's permission to be extraordinary. I know you'll never read this, but if you did, I'd want you to know one thing. That night at your mansion, when you had your son tell me I didn't belong, you were absolutely right. I didn't belong there in that museum of old money and older prejudices. I belonged somewhere bigger, brighter, and infinitely more possible. I belonged in a future I would build myself. What would you have done if someone told you that you didn't belong at the most important moment of your life? Would you have fought for your place at their table? Or would you have had the courage to build your own? I'd love to hear your stories about times when rejection became redirection. Please share in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more content about turning life's obstacles into opportunities. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their worth isn't determined by anyone else's approval. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't proving them wrong, it's proving yourself right.